Chapter 16, Day 98. Day 98, the final day of the walk, will forever remain one of my most precious and sacred memories. I spent 15 hours walking the previous day in order to meet my friend Robbie at his aunt's apartment, which is located only a mile from Santa Monica Beach. In fact, there's a staircase right at the end of the street leading down to the beach. It was a straight shot. A few weeks prior, I had gotten a direct message from Mike Posner asking where I was on my walk and what the remainder of my route would be. I didn't want to get my hopes up at the time, but I knew what he was thinking. We talked over the intervening weeks, and it ended up working out for the both of us to meet up on my last day. Since I had joined his walk 2 years prior, I thought it'd only be fitting to ask if he'd join the last mile of mine. That Friday morning, I was having breakfast in the kitchen when I noticed some guys standing outside the apartment. I didn't think much of it until they continued to stand there. I walked over to the window and saw that they were holding cameras. It all felt so surreal. I heard someone say, "Hey, Mike." I looked up and saw him crossing the street, joining the rest of the camera crew. This was one of those what the fuck moments in life. You know, the ones where you're not quite sure how you got to that point, but you're really happy that you did. Mike Posner was waiting outside with a camera crew for me the day I was about to complete my walk across America. I was having trouble wrapping my head around it. I swung my backpack over my shoulders before leaving the apartment and walking down the steps to greet those waiting for me. "What's up, Mike?" I said. He went in for a hug. "It's been a couple years, man. How have you been?" I asked. We got to catching up, and during this I was able to meet the 3 filmmakers, all around my age, current and former film students. Robbie came down shortly after, making 5 film majors in the group. It definitely wasn't a challenge at all to make conversation. I looked at the time and checked in with the other people I knew were planning to be waiting for me at the beach. I was originally planning to run into the ocean at 8 o'clock sharp, but thankfully, these last moments turned into a much longer ordeal. I feel like there are a lot of the parts of the trip that I rushed, getting too focused on the miles themselves and my ultimate destination. I don't necessarily regret that, because I don't know how much longer I could have realistically handled being out there. By the time the end had come, I was ready to be done. Now that I was finally here, though, there wasn't any desire to rush. Everyone's different. I've heard of other cross-country trekkers arriving at the coast and with zero hesitation making a run for it. I thought I'd be that way, but instead I really spent time taking it all in. I'm really glad I did. After arriving at the beach around 8:20 a.m., I wouldn't run into the ocean until 9:30 or 10. Initially, I spent quite a bit of time by the parking lot, waiting for a couple more of my friends to show up. During this time, we all sat around and chatted, as well as taking a few photos. Once everyone had arrived, it was time for me to take those final steps. I slowly walked toward the water. About 20 feet away, I stopped in my tracks. And finally, it all hit me. The time I had spent, the physical and emotional toll, sacrifices back home. I went through all of that, and finally the end had come. Most would assume being in that moment would be one of the most relieving and proudest moments of my life. And sure, it was, but that wasn't the full extent of why I was so overcome with emotion. I knew deep down that I had sacrificed more than I had originally thought over this 3-month period. I was scared and lost on what was next. This was the moment I had dreamed of for 2 years, and it was really happening, right in front of my eyes. Holding back tears, I laughed to break the tension, turned around, and asked Mike if he had any advice for running into the water. "I don't want to trip, you know," I said with a smile. He came up to me and put his arm around me. What he told me, well, that's between him and me. Mike took a step back. I looked out across the water again, then turned my head back to everyone around. "Well, I guess I gotta do it at some point." I turned back toward the water and started running. It's hard to put into words those next few moments, but one thing did stand out. It was a somewhat chilly morning. I knew the water would be really cold. But there was something so surreal about that moment. Someone asked me how the water felt, and I could only respond with, "I didn't feel it." I felt each individual step sink into the sand. A wave crashed onto the shore right as I approached it, leaving a flattened path of temporarily calmed water. Perfect. I continued my run, shoving my legs through the rising depth before finally making a full dive in. I did it. I walked across the United States of America from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean.